Welcome to Advancement Live. It's Tuesday. It's 1 p.m. Eastern, and it's time to talk advancement. Welcome. We broadcast on the Higher Ed Live Network, a product of EDUniverse Media. Find us at higheredlive.com and join in the conversation on Twitter using the Higher Ed Live hashtag. I am your host, Andrew Gosen. 4 years ago, college and university staff who were thinking about the use of social media in communications, alumni affairs, and fundraising were working in a vacuum. The lucky ones knew of other people on their campuses or at other schools who were asking similar questions as we all struggled to make sense of this tectonic shift in the constituent relations landscape. But there was nothing in the way of data, benchmarking, or best practices to help us out. That is to say, there was nothing that we could use to orient ourselves to the prospect of institutional advancement in a networked world. Case, M. Stoner, and Slover-Linett strategies stepped into this void, designing and administering the first survey on the use of social media in advancement in 2010. 4 years later, this survey has become an essential tool for understanding not only the current state of social media in advancement, but also key trends in the evolution of the use of social technologies to further alumni relations, communications, and fundraising goals. Today, we're going to be talking about the results of the 4th annual survey of social media in advancement conducted by CASE, Huron Education, and M. Stoner. My guests played an essential role in making this survey happen, and there aren't many people out there better positioned to comment on the results. But before turning to our guests, I want to give a shout out to our Advancement Live sponsors, iModules and Countermarch Systems. iModules is the leading constituent engagement management provider for educational institutions. iModules delivers an integrated online platform that transforms how institutions strengthen constituent relationships and achieve fundraising success. iModules, thank you for your support. We also appreciate the sponsorship of Countermarch Systems. From registration to check-in and participation, Countermarch Systems provide software that alumni and staff love to use. We build comprehensive, easy-to-use systems that handle the complexity of reunions and homecomings so that your staff are free to do the important work of alumni engagement. Our mobile apps provide a platform for alumni networking and social media connectivity before, during, and after the event, and are integration ready for a seamless user experience. Find more at countermarch.com/reunion. Countermarch Systems, thank you very much. And now, on with the show. Today's first guest is going to give us a quick overview of the research findings of this year's survey. Cheryl Slover-Linett founded Slover-Linett Strategies in 1997 and led its growth into one of the most respected audience research firms in the culture and education sectors. Huron Education acquired the higher education division of Slover-Linett Strategies in late 2012. Cheryl has built long-term relationships with renowned institutions such as the University of Chicago, Harvard, Stanford, and Columbia, and has become a trusted conduit to the minds and hearts of constituents for these and other leading organizations. Cheryl has designed and led hundreds of strategic audience and market research studies and evaluations and presents widely at higher education conferences. She speaks frequently at CASE, GMAC, and other education conferences, and we're grateful that she's joining us this afternoon on Advancement Live. Cheryl, thanks for joining us, and take it away.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm really glad to be here and share some of the social media study findings with all of you. I'll try to keep my part of the hour somewhat brief, just because I will be going through more research findings. Michael's going to be able to share some of the case studies, and then we'll have a good Q&A at the end. But to start, I'd like to focus on 4 areas, and they are what are the channels that are currently being used most by schools and universities? How's social media being used in fundraising in particular? What is staffing looking like? How do these universities actually manage on the ground all their social media efforts? And then the last one is more on metrics, ROI. How are we determining how successful we are? So to start, back to the question of what channels are being used. There are really a top 4, and it's Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And that probably doesn't come as a surprise to many of you because you're probably using most, if not all, of those. Facebook, for the whole 4 years that we've been doing this survey, has pretty much held the dominant position. It's at 96% usage in universities and colleges and schools. And that's followed now by Twitter. Twitter was up about 2% this year, and it's at about 82% usage. LinkedIn was one of the channels that we saw grow the most. It grew 7 percentage points, and that's at about 75% now. And then YouTube is number 4 at 71. And so those 4 are really the dominant ones. After that, all the other channels are used by less than half of institutions, and they don't tend to use all of them. They probably cherry pick because what we heard is if you can't do it well, you know, don't be on that channel. If your audience isn't there, don't be on that channel. So they're not using every single one. We are seeing more diversification though, because Pinterest, Google Plus, and Instagram all were at about a quarter, about 25% of institutions that use those, and that was big growth over last year. So that is, you know, just something that we'll be watching next year and in future years. And I would guess that there are always going to be some new channels that that we'll want to be measuring. What we did see in terms of decrease was fewer organizations are using blogs and Flickr. They both dropped about 13 percentage points, which is pretty dramatic. So there's definitely change year over year. Why are they on social media? The main goals that we see institutions have are engaging alumni and strengthening their brand and marketing. And we're seeing more and more institutions use these in full campaigns where it's not just, you know, kind of social media over here and advertising over here. Michael's going to give some good examples of those coming up. But that's definitely something that is growing every year. More and more are implementing campaigns that really integrate social media into them. So let's turn briefly to social media and fundraising in particular. We saw about 35% of institutions say that they use social media to raise money. And that has, from what we can tell, that's grown over the years, although this is the first year that we asked that question because we had a big focus on fundraising this year. While not every institution is using it to raise money, many more are using it to communicate with donors. So it might be used for stewardship purposes, to thank donors, or to keep them up to date on institutional news, even if they're not actually making the ask via social media. And when we ask how much money they're raising on social media, it's fairly small right now. 2/3 of institutions said that they raised less than $10,000 via social channels. So, you know, it's a good start, but I'd say we certainly haven't tapped into all of the potential there, and there are, I'm sure, going to be more opportunities to use social media for fundraising. Turning to the staffing question, it was kind of an interesting shift this year. We saw more time and resources being spent on social media, but no growth in employees. So what that says to us is that the social media responsibilities are getting shared over more people. So there are more FTEs, if you will, full-time equivalents, that are being used for social media, but they're not necessarily hiring more people to do it. And we have seen that even though we have now this, you know, an increase in staffing, if you will, more people are saying they don't have enough staff. So in our minds, that suggests that the expectations of social media have grown, the goals for social media have grown, but the staffing has grown somewhat, but not in line with what the expectations are for universities. So it's good news on the one hand that they're using social media more, but staffing is lagging, and we're just seeing more institutions saying that they don't have the resources that they need. Looking at the last topic of measurement, for the most part, people are using kind of digital analytics as the measurement, but we are finding that ROI continues to be harder and harder to measure. And so that's also one of those that you know, you kind of have to think about a little bit. If we have more and more analytics, why is ROI harder to measure? And we can get into this a little bit later in the discussion, but it does appear that it's harder, at least right now, to grasp what type of ROI is needed, and we can think about, you know, ways that we could improve that. You know, another thing that we're seeing just in terms of success, and this may have something to do with the ROI, is that This year we saw a big jump in how essential a champion is viewed. And when we first started measuring this 4 years ago, about half of people said having a champion for social media is really important. Now we're up to 72%. And that, to me, at first seemed a little counterintuitive, because I would have guessed that the more accepted social media is within an institution and the more it's valued, why do you need a champion? But now, 20 percentage points more, in terms of growth in that answer, more and more people are finding that a champion is really important. And why is that? Is it because social media, the expectations are increasing for social media? Possibly. So those are some of the things that we can delve into in a little bit. And I think at this point, I'd like to turn it back to Andrew, who will introduce Michael, and we can get into the case studies, and then we'll come full circle and have a discussion about all this.
Great, thank you, Cheryl. I hope the audience found that as interesting as I did. There are just two things that jumped out for me as you were speaking that I thought it would be worth highlighting now before moving on to the case studies. The first is that it's nice to have data in the survey that people are in fact being discriminating about the channels that they use. I know that over the past 12 to 18 months there's been a lot of activity on digital media in higher ed blog spaces, especially trying to make the case that if you try to do everything, you won't do anything well.
Right.
And I think that there's consensus around that, but then having survey data to back up the fact that people are heeding this and recognizing that they have bandwidth limitations and they need to think about the tools discriminatingly and strategically is an encouraging thing. I'm intrigued by this whole notion of champions, and I wonder if the role of champions within an institution may be evolving. I would say back when the survey started, the role of a champion may have been to try to talk to people and say, look, you actually really need to take this evolving digital space seriously, because otherwise the world's going to pass you by. But now perhaps the role of that champion is more one of fighting for scarce budget dollars, trying to get digital initiatives that are accepted in principle funded in such a way that they can actually make an impact in a way that would have some quantitative, widely respected ROI down the road. So those were just two initial thoughts that came to my mind as I was hearing you speak.
Yeah, and I think the champion might also need to play the role of collaborating with other departments, because as we'll see, that if we're doing more and more campaigns when social media is really integrated, that integration is not always easy, and it definitely takes a village. So that was another thought.
Fantastic. Great. Well, let's move on to Michael and the case studies, and we can get back to this whole ROI question in about 20 minutes. So this year's survey produced not only the analysis that Cheryl just shared with us, but also a series of case studies illustrating some key themes and trends. Joining us to dive deeper into a few of these case studies is Michael Stoner. During 30 years as a communicator and consultant, Michael, the president of M. Stoner, has served hundreds of educational institutions, nonprofits, and businesses on 4 continents. He is recognized as an authority on how institutions can use the internet and the web to communicate effectively with their constituents and how they can engage effectively using social media. A pioneer in e-communications, he published his first email newsletter in the early 1990s and completed his first university website project in 1995. M. Stoner was launched in 2001, and the company quickly built a reputation for internet strategy and website development. They celebrated their 12th birthday this past Friday, so happy birthday, M. Stoner, and may you enjoy many more. Now, M. Stoner is a highly regarded agency offering brand strategy and implementation across the web, social media, print, and other channels for schools, colleges, and universities. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Andrew.
So you're going to talk us through a couple of case studies that illustrate key findings from the survey, right? The floor is all yours. Take it away.
Thank you. I am. And this year we included 6 case studies in the white paper. Last year we also included 6. And interestingly enough, 2 of the case studies last year were about fundraising. One from Elizabethtown College and Messiah College. And that one was a competition between the 2 institutions. And this year we looked at different kinds of institutions, different fundraising strategies, and different types of campaigns and different kinds of results. And we wanted to pick a range of approaches, a range of case studies, and not necessarily focus on significant and large results, but just show how things were evolving in this space. So the two that I thought were interesting in particular to talk about today was one from Phillips Exeter Academy and the other from Columbia University, and I think they illustrate different philosophies and show how institutions are using social media in different ways, in the case of Exeter, to build toward a campaign in the future and to illustrate to constituents that there is a pattern of communication and engagement that the institution will engage in. And then over time, that engagement will build to a larger result, although the results of each specific small campaign aren't quite great. It's the fact that there's engagement occurring over time, and at some point in the future, that engagement will pay off for Exeter, they believe, as do I. And the second campaign from Columbia is an illustration of the fact that you can raise significant amounts of money using social channels. So let's talk about both of those briefly, and you can see the case studies, read the in-depth case studies for yourself in the white paper. So first, the work that is being done at Exeter, I think, is really interesting. Exeter, of course, is an independent school, and these campaigns are being conducted. The campaigns that are profiled in the white paper are being conducted with current students at Exeter, by and large, and they're part of the program that Exeter has to help students while they're on campus, while they're in their living quarters, while they're engaged in their daily lives, to understand that they're part of a continuum of people at Exeter whose contributions have allowed them to be on a campus with a lot of activities, with great resources. And so they benefited from the gifts of fellow Exeter alumni. So now it's their turn to contribute. And the one that we wrote about in the case study in particular is the Big Red Dorm Challenge, where living units on Exeter's campus compete against each other during a week-long event to contribute to the annual fund, or to the Exeter Fund. And so it involves gamification, it involves emails and Facebook and other channels, using those channels as a way to get students and alumni to contribute to the challenge and puts living groups against each other. And again, one of the importance of that is that this is something that Exeter is doing to build awareness and engagement over a period of time. One of the great learnings I think that Exeter has is that this is working for them, and they're looking for a longer payoff in participation. Let's talk for a minute about Columbia and Columbia's Giving Day. The first Columbia Giving Day was held on October 24th in 2012, and we wrote about that one in the white paper in the case study, and the second one was just conducted on October 23rd, 2013. Giving Day is a day in which the schools and the major units, the business school, the law school, on the School of Journalism on Columbia's campus, compete against each other to see which one can raise the most money in a day. And the staff at Columbia has done a really marvelous job organizing this campaign. But one of the interesting things to me about Columbia Giving Day is that it is so heavily promoted. The channels that Columbia uses to promote it include postcards, print advertising. They talk about it at events, so there's a promotion at Homecoming, Leadership Weekend, alumni and donor events. They have little buttons that they give away, and they do a large amount of online promotion too. They do a website, they do a promotion on their social channels in advance. They do trainings for people, communicators, and social media people in the various schools to help take advantage of the Giving Day promotion. They've built a website that is a responsive design, so you can access it on a mobile device, a phone, a tablet, or on your computer screen. There are lots of elements of gamification built into this. So last year, for example, they did hourly contests, and they had a leaderboard, and people check in to see how things were going. This year, last year, they raised $6.8 million, and they had 5,380 gifts from 4,940 donors. This year, they raised $7,827,636, and they had 9,759 gifts from 50 states and 53 countries. So if anybody tells you that you can't raise money from social media, tell them what Columbia did.
Fantastic, Michael. Thank you so much for sharing those two case studies with us. I think they're both tremendous examples. I'm particularly fond of Columbia Giving Day as an example. Chloe Demmer and Justin Ware were both on the show a couple of weeks ago, and it was fascinating to hear Chloe's take on Giving Day the week before Giving Day actually happened, and certainly all of us here at Cornell Alumni Affairs and Development were glued to the screen hitting F5 over and over again to watch the numbers skyrocket there, thereby proving that it was not just a case of lightning striking, but it was a success that they were able to replicate. I was impressed that they not only got to drive the dollars by almost $1 million, but they also almost doubled the number of gifts, which suggests that as a pure engagement play, something good was going on there.
Well, that's right, and I think it's a clear indication that if you are smart about how you lay the groundwork and make sure that you're working all the channels and making the connections, not only external connections, but internal connections. You know, Cheryl mentioned the importance of working together, and that is absolutely critical, and I think that the success at Columbia shows how important it is to really bring people together around something like this. The scale is really impressive.
And I'm sure that with that kind of dollar amount, that's not going to be the only significant experiment with online giving days in higher ed in the next 12 to 18 months.
We look forward to seeing Cornell top it.
Well, we're smaller, remember. We're certainly paying very close attention and thinking about when the right time might be to throw our hat in that particular ring. So let's bring Cheryl back into the conversation now and talk about some of the other interesting issues and implications of the survey results. Cheryl, I did mute you because I think Michael's voice was coming out of your speaker and being picked up by your microphone, so you may need to unmute yourself. Can you try that? It's in the top of your screen in the middle there.
All right.
All right, you're back with us. Excellent.
Great.
Good. So to start with, the survey is pretty clear that Facebook is the core social media property for most institutions. And at the same time, we hear continued hand-wringing in the media about Facebook's teen problem, in which it seems that Facebook is no longer considered cool among the teenagers. Do you think that this is a long-term problem for the use of Facebook by advancement professionals? I know Michael's probably champing at the bit for this one because he always has opinions about Facebook.
Yes, well, you know how much I love Facebook. You know, I think that I hear a lot of anecdotal reports from teens about how bored they are with Facebook and how they don't like Facebook because their parents are there, and it no longer seems cool. It doesn't seem private, and I've also heard them talk about how freaked out they are by all the reports of what Facebook can learn about you. Of course, you know, so can Twitter and Tumblr and Instagram and all the platforms that they're engaged in. But in any case, you know, and I think that this is a problem in the long term for advancement. But I think we have to all be clear about the fact that the social media landscape is evolving rapidly, and we don't know that any of the platforms that we're currently using are going to be operative in 10 years. And we don't know what's going to change between now and then. So I think it's really important that we all be paying attention to this. We're very clear about the fact that we do need to monitor what's going on. We do need to be aware of what's happening in Facebook and the changes that are occurring there. And you know, I think Cheryl made a really good point. We started about some of these emerging platforms. They are emerging platforms. We have to pay attention to them, and we also have to acknowledge the fact that right now there are platforms that are really prominent, that people that we want to reach are using. And so while we might be interested in, say, Pinterest, we need to focus on the ones that are really delivering results, and those are Facebook and Twitter primarily.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's going to be probably a long time in social media years before Facebook, you know, is not a player. I think it is going to be a player for a long time, just given how dominant it has been to date. And you know, I think that there is also a you know, a self-reinforcing element that happens here with social media. And if a lot of people are on that one channel, that's where the university invests, and that is self-fulfilling. But at the same time, you know, it can change pretty quickly. So these top four of you know, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook, that wasn't how it looked, you know, 4 years ago. So Twitter wasn't even really on the horizon. LinkedIn has grown a lot, and you know, it also depends. If you're a business school, I mean, LinkedIn is going to be more important to you over the years. So, so I guess I have no crystal ball, but I would bet that Facebook will still be there. And you know, if we're doing this show in 3 years, I'd say Facebook will still be in the top four.
I very much agree with both of you, and I think one of the things that's often missed in this anguish over the fact that Facebook isn't cool is the fact that teenagers actually are not the people we're after if what we're doing is we're looking to connect with alumni and raise money, especially.
That's right.
I mean, absolutely, from an admissions perspective, we need to be paying attention to where the teens are. But if I'm looking for people who have capacity to make a difference on the bottom line of a campaign, I actually want to be where all the parents are, and the grandparents too, because those are the people who are going to be able to make a difference and who I need to spend my time cultivating.
That's right. I talked to a college president a couple of weeks ago who is very forward-thinking in the way he uses social media, and he said that his use of social media has connected him with all kinds of alumni, all kinds of donors in all demographics. And he said he doesn't make assumptions about who's using social media anymore because he meets old, quite elderly alumni and donors who are following him on Facebook or following him on Twitter and want to engage with him in those channels.
My colleague Keith Hannon has a great anecdote when he runs into people trying to tell him that social media is just a young person's game, and he describes the process of getting the Cornell class of 1947 set up on their Facebook page, and that usually ends the conversation right there. He wins the conversation. So one of the main focal points of this year's survey is the increasing use of social media in fundraising. Why do you think it took so long for institutions to begin to explore this leg of the advancement tripod?
Yeah, it's a great question, and you know, one could draw some quick conclusions about their lagging, because the development team did lag. You know, marketing we saw was really active with social media 3-4 years ago, but development teams were not. And you know, my hypothesis is that in development teams, it's a lot about the relationship, and you know, the vast majority of money for campaigns is raised, you know, through principal gifts, major gifts, and that's a one-on-one business. It's often face-to-face. So I think initially there was this thought of social media being, you know, for the masses. And so, okay, you know, maybe the annual fund would use it, but it, you know, if you use the 80-20 rule, I think that development just didn't see social media as important in their, you know, raising the big gifts. Now, has that changed that much? No, I don't think that social media, from what I can tell, social media isn't being used to, you know, connect to a potential top prospect. But I think that these examples like Columbia, you know, can show us is that it's not only about fundraising, it is about engagement. And I'm hearing more and more clients talk about how important alumni engagement is on its own, you know, regardless of the fundraising component. So I think that to the degree that the social media activities can bridge that gap between, say, alumni engagement and fundraising, that's going to be, you know, a really important development. So, you know, go ahead, Michael. I'll add after you say.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, Cheryl. And part of the challenge in the ROI equation is that it's always well, first of all, it's hard to define engagement. Let's start there. But it's also difficult to measure engagement. And so we have to look at some measure of engagement that involves real-world results. And in advancement, one real-world result is a gift. So, but that's only one result. And so I talk to people at institutions who are looking at other ways to measure engagement in order to demonstrate value to a vice president or some other senior leaders about the importance of investing in this particular channel.
Thank you. Cheryl, to your point about viewing these tools as ways to engage the masses as opposed to engaging particular individuals, that's something that my team's been thinking about a lot recently, and we now actually have not one but two anecdotes in which we have absolutely bulletproof evidence that by building a relationship via social media over time, we have been able to get two high-value individuals to begin to respond and ultimately to do something for us in a way that incontestably links directly back to our social media efforts. And these were people who were approached through all of the conventional channels reasonably aggressively, and it took actually building a relationship on Twitter to make this happen. So I'm sure that we'll be talking about this more as we figure out how we want to present this type of a case study to the broader advancement community, but we're finding that it is possible.
And that's fascinating. I think what comes to mind for me, it gets back to the staffing issue. I mean, to develop these one-on-one relationships, whether it's on the phone, in person, or via Twitter, I mean, it takes time, and it takes the willingness to invest in a relationship. I mean, I'm getting the sense from you that it wasn't just mass tweeting that developed the relationship with these folks. It was
careful one-on-one cultivation and building a relationship just like you would offline.
Yeah. That's great news.
Oh, it's exciting stuff, and that's part of expectation management, right? If you manage expectations about what the R on the I is, you're going to end up in a much better place than if people think that suddenly we're saying, yeah, we tweeted somebody and they give millions of dollars. That's not the way it works at all. Well, we're starting a conversation, and of course, those of us who work in the digital space every day recognize that this is a slow process. But we want to make sure that the people who are expecting us to tell them how we're helping them understand that as well.
Well, I think one of the key points there, too, Andrew, is that that doesn't happen when you have an intern, or let's say it seldom happens when you have an intern or a part-time student managing your social channels. It comes from people who are fully engaged, fully aware, and understand how valuable these channels can be in an overall advancement strategy.
I couldn't agree more, and that actually leads directly into my next question, which is that the survey indicates that while the number of FTEs dedicated to social media are rising, the number of dedicated staff positions at colleges and universities is not. What do you both make of treating social media as more or less an other duty as assigned?
Well, I think it's in the framing. I mean, if it's, oh, this is one more thing that you need to do on top of the 50 other things, that isn't going to feel good. But as you just described in your example, I imagine the people who were tweeting had other responsibilities, and as Michael said, were fully engaged in what the development team was doing. So I actually have been a big proponent of social media being more distributed throughout a department, if you will, and being part of everyone's job. I think it's important to have that a bit more public persona, if you will, and have teams have a presence on the social channels. So I think that benefits departments in a whole way by just having a more engaged group of staff. That isn't something that the survey has measured so much, but it's something anecdotally that I see. So I actually think it's probably a good thing that we're seeing it more distributed and not just siloed in a couple of people.
Yeah, I agree with that. In the first white paper that we did in this research, I wrote a case study about the Emory Alumni Association, and the idea that they had then, and I confess I haven't followed up on this in the subsequent, what is it, Cheryl, 4 years? Wow. Anyway, but their idea was that social media, Facebook, Twitter, were another key channel that their staff needed to use to engage their constituents, whatever they were, if they were responsible for a class or a living group, or whatever group they were responsible for. And so the role of the more dedicated people in their association at that time was to make sure that their colleagues were trained and knew how to use these channels. And then there was some coordination, through the whole association about messaging and decisions being made about what were the sort of messages of the week. And I thought that was a very interesting approach and a very effective strategy. And really, I think in the future, it's not that we won't have people who had specific in-depth expertise in social media, because we need people who are going to follow the changes in Facebook and help us all adjust to whatever the engineers are cooking up right now and are rolling out tomorrow, and that will change everything. But people really need to know when it's best to pick up the phone and talk to somebody, to the point that you were making earlier about those one-to-one communications, or whether it's a DM or an IM or an email or a text message to reach the person or the group that you're trying to engage with.
I couldn't agree more. I'm a huge fan of the notion of distributed responsibility for social media throughout an organization, clearly with some people and key points tying together the various different business units in such a way that you have a coordinated, integrated digital experience. But it feels to me as though the more people you have who are able to represent the institution effectively, or the advancement shop effectively on the social web, that just increases your footprint. and it increases the number of one-to-one relationships that you may be able to develop. And one of the things that's so interesting about the notion of one-to-one relationships is that, as you alluded to, Michael, there may be some people for whom Twitter is never going to be the right channel, and it ought to be done entirely by more conventional methods. But by the same token, there may be people who simply are not responding, for whom Twitter is, that's the place they go. My own staff have realized that if they really need me to pay attention to something right away, they send me a DM on Twitter, because that's the one thing that cuts through the noise pretty instantaneously. And the same thing has to hold true for the people with whom we're engaging on behalf of our institutions. So one question that sort of emerged as I was thinking about the survey and this burgeoning number of FTEs is the fact that this possibly could be a reflection of increasing collaboration across the alumni affairs and communication and fundraising silos. One of the things that really jumped out as I was reading the case studies was the amount of collaboration that it took to make these initiatives work. And do you think we could interpret it this way, that this is a sign that more people in more different silos are beginning to think about the social tools and how they can work together to advance broader institutional goals?
I think that's one implication of what we're seeing, not just that data point, but the fact is that you can't develop a campaign like Columbia did, like Giving Day, by just having one or two people work on it. You really do need to have people across the institution collaborating, and so that if we're starting to scale social media initiatives, if we're starting to scale campaigns to that level, we are going to have collaboration, and the more collaboration across the institution, the more successful it'll be.
Yeah, it also occurs to me that it's both more people, say, within the development department or alumni relations, as well as more people in other departments. So it's, you know, even if you just look at alumni relations and development, I'm sure that there were, you know, over a dozen people at Columbia working on the Giving Day campaign.
And it's not just the staff, but it's also the volunteers. I was struck in reading the case studies with how many institutions invested time in training volunteers to be able to do some of the heavy lifting, to make this happen and to be able to sustain these campaigns in a 24/7 real-time environment.
Right, that's absolutely right. Columbia really did a great deal to train volunteers. Justin Ware calls them ambassadors, and I really love that term because it's completely apt. That you need to make sure ambassadors are engaged, and identify who they are to begin with. You should know that, and then second, if you're doing a campaign, you want to make sure that they're engaged and they're helping you reach the people that they're connected to.
Right, and I think in a way this is an exciting new volunteer opportunity that's emerging as we get more and more used to this. I mean, historically, higher ed has done a great job at mobilizing alumni energy to advance the institution on a number of fronts, and of course the classical expression of that is asking alumni for time, talent, and treasure. It feels like we're seeing the emergence of a fourth thing we can ask them for, that being their networks. And when you think about the fact that some of these people have now been on the networks for 5 years, their networks are among their most precious possessions. They've spent a lot of time building them and curating them and nurturing them, and now they can deploy them on our behalf.
Well, that's right, and I think that's one of the things that's really exciting about what Exeter is doing, and really forward-thinking about what Exeter is doing. They're starting when their constituents are in high school. So just imagine what it's going to be like by the time they're in their 40s and start to really be able to think about contributing in significant ways to the academy.
Right, so they've been contributing all along, and it's just a question of how do they expand the range of ways in which they contribute. I like that framing of it. That's
exactly right.
I'm still trying to think of a word that begins with T to represent network. So I'll continue to ponder that, and we can then have time, talent, and something else.
Yep, if anybody out there online has a suggestion, please go ahead and tweet that on in. So my next question is a complicated one, and I'll try to articulate it as coherently as possible. In the white paper, you write that you, and I'm quoting here, believe that demonstrating to senior leaders that universities can raise money through the use of social channels will further demonstrate how powerful social media can be and legitimize it in the minds of senior leadership, justifying ongoing and perhaps increased investment. So I absolutely agree with that. If we expect people to invest further resources in this area in a time where we're still operating under pretty significant financial constraints, we've got to prove that we can deliver impact to the bottom line. At the same time, however, I was looking at the measures that were used most extensively to assess outcomes in the survey, and they're all relegated to the digital realm. Things like audience size, interaction counts, click-throughs, and so on and so forth. It feels to me like there's a disjuncture there, in that we're trying to quantify what we're doing in digital terms, but the people who we need to make the case to further investment to don't necessarily ascribe any value to those digital measures whatsoever. And my question is, do you think we're asking the right questions? Is there a way that we could ask our questions differently, pose ourselves different challenges that might speak more to the senior leadership types?
I think that's a really great point, and the way I'm coming to think of it is that the digital measures really need to be thought of as a means to an end rather than the end in and of itself, and then thinking about what the end is. I mean, in fundraising, one end certainly is how much money you raise, but I don't think it's the only end, because there's alumni engagement, and then there's, you know, increased awareness, and so there are multiple returns, I guess, that we could be measuring. Some of them are fairly easy, like the Giving Day. That they have a great measure, and that's probably going to be the main one that leadership is focusing on, as you mentioned. But I do think that there are these other, you know, sometimes a little squishier. Michael, you mentioned how, you know, engagement is hard enough to define, let alone measure, and, you know, we've definitely done some work along those lines, but it's hard to measure. You can't measure it on a daily basis as easily as, you know, some other things. So thanks for bringing up that point, because I do think that the whole field needs to be thinking more about what are the ends that digital media can help us achieve.
Yeah, I think that you know, the challenge is really that if we're going to be asking the question is how are we more rigorous about measuring some of these outcomes or some progress toward goals, it does mean that we're going to have to spend money on research, whether we actually write a check to somebody or whether we have somebody on our staff do that research. That's one way, short of a campaign like Giving Day, where you can actually track the results. We did this campaign and we raised X number of dollars. You know, so much of this is about tracking outcomes in the real world. So how do you quantify some of the time and talent that and the networks that your alumni, for example, are contributing? What value can you assign to that, and how do you measure it? That's one way of tracking outcomes, and we need to be thinking about more rigorous ways. It's easy to count followers, it's easy to count retweets, and I understand why people do it. And every time I see it cited as a sort of proof of something, I just go, oh my God, I am so over hearing about that kind of stuff. Because what does it mean really? You know, I want to see dollars. I want to see students recruited. I want to see students retained. You know, measures that really matter, actions that people are taking as a result of something that happens in a social channel. And I understand how hard it is to measure that stuff at the same time.
I think it also may require those of us who are working with the digital tools to think outside the boundaries of what we normally consider to be our responsibilities. Because I can't tell you how many fundraisers I've talked to who think that communications, not my job. I deal with the prospects. That's my area of responsibility. And then you run into communications and alumni folks who say, money, not my job. And it feels to me that it's at the intersection of all of these silos that we're going to find the questions and the collaborations that can actually produce good answers to the ROI question.
That's right.
And without letting go of what our perceptions tell us is our responsibility, we may never end up asking questions that give us good answers.
Well, let's get back to the role of champions in this whole discussion, because one of the most valuable things that a champion can do, and I'm thinking about a president or a senior vice president who's leading an advancement organization, is making sure that she is holding people accountable and making sure that they're working together in ways that are furthering the goals of the organization and getting more robust results of the kind that we're talking about here.
Do you think that a person in that type of position needs to use the digital tools, him or herself, in order to be able to do that effectively?
Well, I think that it helps, but it helps because the more you understand about how these kinds of things work, the less satisfied you'll be with an answer like, "Oh yeah, our number of followers increased, by so much." Well, so what? What does that mean? And I look at what Columbia did on their Giving Day, and one of the things that they tracked, and one of their measures of success was the fact that their followers across all their social properties in 2012 increased, even though for a significant amount of time they were moving giving messages on their key social channels. So that said to me that those messages weren't a turnoff. People actually understood why it was happening and valued it to the extent that they wanted to hear more. And of course, I also believe that the assumption was this is a day, so we're not going to get it next week, and probably next month we're not going to hear about this. But for right now, I'm perfectly fine with it. And there's also enough interesting content here that I want to find out what's going on at Columbia. I want to continue to be part of this conversation and make sure that I'm up to date on what's happening at the university.
I also thought they did a good job of using the social tools to create a sense of momentum towards a big event.
Right.
And people don't get tired of the fact that there's all the hype leading up to the Super Bowl. People clearly do get tired if there's 2 years of hype leading up to an election. That's a bit too much. But you want to end up somewhere in that sweet spot where people understand that you're heading towards a definite end point, at which point things are going to die off a little bit. But then they're also knowing that they will be able to take part in this event that's much larger than themselves. And I think that's a compelling reason to keep paying attention.
Right. Yep, exactly. Mm-hmm.
Great.
And I think there's also something around wanting to be part of something successful. So I know a while ago there was some research that I think was done in public radio about kind of the pledge drives and how they found that if they were kind of 80% there and just needed the last 20%, they were able to get much more money than if they weren't at that place of success already. So I would imagine that maybe the first Giving Day might be a little bit challenging to pull off, but after that it will continue to gain more and more momentum each year.
It's all about inertia.
If anybody from Columbia is listening, next year it's 12 million.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry to set the bar high.
So I think we've got time for one more question before we have to wrap up. And let's speculate a little bit. This survey is now in its 4th year, and based on the trends that we've observed over that time, what do you think that we can anticipate next? What's a prediction from each of you?
I'm going to let Michael go first.
Well, I have some ideas about what I'd like to focus on next year, and Cheryl and I haven't really talked about this, but I think one of the things that we're going to see is more leadership interest in, and in fact engagement in outreach through social media.
That would be exciting indeed, and will probably provide us with an interesting slate of new social media disasters to choose from, in addition to some tremendous successes.
Well, it's,
Cheryl, how about you?
It's about transparency and leadership, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Leaders make mistakes just like everybody else.
And I would say I'm looking forward to seeing more collaboration, not just between alumni and development teams, but also admissions, marketing, student affairs for the current students, and just seeing how social channels can help link all of those groups together and have more common goals. So I guess with my idealist hat, I'm seeing social media as a way to break down silos.
I sure hope you're right on that front, because it stands to reason that would be an extremely effective way of breaking down silos, but I just don't know if all of us working in institutions can be brave and secure enough in ourselves to take that risk. Great.
Well, time will tell. We shall see.
Yes, it will. So any last words as we wrap things up here?
Well, I would just love to thank everybody who's listening and say we actually are very interested in hearing what other questions this raises for people. So if you want to send in other questions that you'd like to see us include next year, we'd always be very grateful for that. And
what's the best way for them to send that to you?
I'm guessing to somehow get it to Michael via tweet, or can they tweet now to send in?
If you tweet now using the Higher Ed Live hashtag, we can certainly consolidate those and pass them along to Cheryl and Michael.
Yeah, I think that's great. We'd love to get input on this, and whatever you are willing to share with us, ideas for questions or what you'd like to see us ask next year, that would be great.
Fantastic. Michael and Cheryl, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure. We have now come to the end of our hour. Advancement Live will be on hiatus next week, but Ryan Catherwood will be back on November 19th, talking with Megan Costello from the University of Wisconsin about new ideas for print within the arts and sciences advancement space. Once again, thank you to our sponsors, iModules and Countermart Systems. As always, you can watch more shows from Advancement Pros on the Advancement Live archive, located at higheredlive.com. Thanks everyone who tuned in live, and see you next time. Thanks.